Hello, I'm Daniela. Stitch with Me in 2024 is a year-long online workshop with roots in slow stitching. In the first of the month, a prompt will be released and you'll create your response to that prompt. The idea is that the prompt is a word or a phrase or a feeling, and you're supposed to create that to show in your work. Now, some people take that prompt and instead of slow stitching, they'll do paper arts or mixed media, and I encourage you to do whatever type of artwork really speaks to you. The point of the prompt is that you create something unique, original to you. Now, you don't have to strive to create anything original. If the prompt speaks to you and it was the same basic premise as somebody else's, well, that's okay too. But if you want to be original and you want to seek out the challenge of creating something completely unique to yourself, go right ahead and do that. The whole point of this series is to make something for you that you can look back on and love. Stitch with Me in 2023 was just that for me. We created a book made of index cards, and on each of those index cards was my answer to the monthly prompts. I have this completed book that I adore. If you'd like to take that index card format to make a little book, go right ahead. But for 2024, I'm making a snippet roll. I'm creating my roll of fabric and just continuing to add to it as the year progresses. I'll make a piece to start with that's maybe 2 or 3 months, and then I'll just continue to add. It's very flexible. I basically determine the height of my piece, and then I'll just continue to add throughout the year. The beauty of this is I can make everything approximately the same size and width, say 4 inches. So each of my prompts will fit into that piece that's 4 inches. Or I could do something completely different, which is what I think I'm going to do, is where I'll start with my prompts, and some might overlap, some might be 4 inches, some might be longer. Some might go on the top of the page, and others might swirl around it. Some might have continuous elements throughout the year. I'll show you more as we go, but for today's video, I want to create just the basis of that snippet roll. So that way you can prep ahead of time if you'd like to follow along with this technique. Now again, please feel free to modify this however you see fit. So let me show you how to do it. So for the snippet roll, if you're going to follow this format and use the prompts the way that I'm using them for this year, this is the format you'll use. You'll make this like roll here. Now this is just a demo. It is not the one that I'm going to make or work on throughout the year, but I wanted to show you the logistics of it to help you picture what we'll be doing. This one is not very tall. It's probably 3 inches tall, about 7 centimeters, and I just roughly eyeballed the spacing for each month. Now, because I didn't want to cut all my fabric for 12 months ahead of time, I have some additional fabric, and I'll continue to add to it if I was working on this piece, just by stitching it down on either side here and continuing it along. So the raw edge would be turned under, and I'd stitch over there, continuing it along as I go. It's kind of cumbersome to work with a roll in the entirety from the beginning, and I like the freedom of making some prompts longer or shorter accordingly to my mood. If you like to do it precisely and you like to have exactly 4 inches or 15 centimeters or whatever your width and size are, go ahead, follow that route. If you want to create a prompt and make a book with it, each prompt is a page, just like we did last year, go right ahead. Make this your own project. When I demonstrate the prompts, I'm going to demonstrate them, however, on the snippet roll. I just think it's a different activity and it's a different thing to look at. It's more enjoyable for me as the creator, but by all means, I want you to have that enjoyment level as well. So this is one example of the snippet roll. You do not have to have an ending piece like I have here, kind of like a scroll, but I'm going to show you some variations because I think it just finishes the piece off. And ideally, I probably put matching sides on the final piece as well as the start of it. And then you just roll it up. Now you don't need to have anything. You can just roll up the fabric plain. I like that. I like that indicator of start and finish. That's just something I like. I also stamped with rubber stamps the months. You don't have to do that either. And I tend to think on my project, what I'm working on throughout the year, that I won't necessarily stamp the months, and you can use stamps like this, which have the entire month there, or I have just the letters. I stamped each one out. I'm probably going to stamp the actual prompt, the word that the prompt is, because then it gives it a little more explanation. Or maybe I'll do both. I haven't really thought that through yet. But if this is something you like, I like to gather my supplies so that they're handy, and I keep them all in one box that I'll use throughout the year and reference them. So you have to decide on the height. The width is not as important because you'll just continue to add fabric as needed. So decide on your height. I've decided on the height that I'm going to use, and I made a little template. This is 5.5 inches tall. The template happens to be 8.5 inches wide, but that's only because this piece of cardstock is that length. So it's 14 centimeters tall. That's going to be my snippet roll. So I have some muslin to that effect. Now, when you're deciding what size to make your snippet roll, there are some things to consider. The first thing is, how do you want to wrap your roll? So let me set these aside and show you what I mean by that. If you have an existing spool that you might want to use, this might be what determines the height of your snippet roll. And so this one is about 6 centimeters or 2.5 inches. This is just something I had left over. I think I got it at the Target spot years and years ago. So if I wanted to have a piece of fabric that would fit in there, I would cut it accordingly for that height. You can also reuse an existing cardboard tube. Just remove the existing ribbon, and you can attach your ribbon to it. And you could cover this with decorative paper if you'd like. So that's a second option. You can leave it without anything on the end. It doesn't require it. You can just hem the end if you like. For this piece, what I did was I took some of this cording and I just clipped it to a little bit taller than I wanted to use, strung a bead on, knotted the end, stitched it through my fabric, added another bead and knotted it on, and it just gives it a little weight, something of interest there. So that's a very inexpensive option. There are some other options that are just as nice. You can buy a kit of those empty fabric rolls, the ones that I showed you where I unwound the ribbon. And depending on the height, you can use that if you particularly want a set height. This one is the largest I could find. It's 3 3/4 inches tall. So that's something to consider as well. It comes with all the parts. I'm going to cover these if I was to use those, and then you attach them. And then attach your fabric to it. Either tape it like you saw on the ribbon, or you can stitch it on, which is what I think I would do. If you want, you can just use a tongue depressor. You can stitch your fabric around it, maybe tape it to it, and this will allow you to wrap your fabric. So that's a thought. Again, very simple. You can use a beautiful twig or a stick. Another option is to get a dowel. These are very inexpensive. You can cut them, usually with some just handy tools that you have. And these are just little end caps for it that I would glue on. And this looks more like a scroll. And I would just make sure I had two, one for the front and one for the start and the finish of my roll. And yet there's another one that's even more inexpensive, and that's to create a bobbin just by cutting cardboard. This is just scrap cardboard. I cut it into the shape I wanted, the height. I made little extras here. I'll probably paint this or decoupage it, but then I can just wrap my fabric all the way around that snippet roll. So that's kind of a beautiful way to present that as well. So once you decide on the height, there are some other things to consider. So here I have what I'm going to use for my height. It's 5.5 inches. I'll just move this out of the way for now. So I can decide if I want the rough seam here, and that's just like I had it here where it's torn. and I do like that effect. At the end of the workshop, next December, I'll probably cover it with either additional fabric, or perhaps I have ribbon to cover just the back of it, just to make it more finished. But I don't have to do that either. These are all just options to consider. And the beauty of that is I don't even have to decide that today. If I decide when I'm making this that I want my edges up top and up bottom to be neat, and by neat I mean I have a little seam there, well, I have a couple of options. I can just use the raw edge and then finish it like a quilt with a seam binding. That's a little bit more work than I want to do. So what I'm going to do is just create my piece. So I have a piece of fabric that's about 1 inch taller on both sides than my template. My template is going to be the finished size that I'll work on. And I like to give it a little room to start with and a little room to end with. And then I'm just going to trace my shape. Now this is a heat erasable pen. You don't have to use that for this technique. I am going to press this with an iron, but I just want to make sure it fits. And so now I'll just take this edge and press it neatly on that line that I have here. But before I do that, because this is just muslin and it's very lightweight, I want to give it a backing. I can use fusible padding, like a fusible batting. This is just fusible adhesive, single-sided, and so when I fuse this on with a hot iron, it acts like another piece of fabric and just makes it a little more stable. So I'm just going to cut it. I don't need it to be fused on the top here where I'm going to flip my fabric. So I'm just going to cut it neatly, just a little bit further than the template I cut out. And I'll set aside additional so that in the future, as I continue my project, I'll have more of that backing that I can use. And I'm going to slip it here, making sure that the textured side is the part that's going to adhere to the back of this fabric, just like this. And then I'll press it with my iron. And now when I press it with my iron, these marks will disappear. But it does show better on camera when I have those marks so you can see what I'm doing. And I don't mind adding those marks. If it was a problem, I would just use a permanent marker. I'll let this cool. And now I have my fabric with my backing. And this way I can embroider it nicely without having to put it through a hoop. You could always put it through a hoop as well. I like to leave a little extra here because this is where I'm going to attach it. I'll either attach it to another piece of fabric and then run it through one of these pieces that I'll put on the end. But I haven't decided what I want to do for the end. I do like this little rope. I just like that look. There's nothing wrong with using anything else, but I haven't decided what I'm going to do for the end yet. And I don't have to decide. That's the beauty of this project. I work on it when I'm in the mood, and I hope you do the same. So now, just to finish getting it ready, I'm going to retrace those lines using my template, which I'm going to set aside in my box. And now I just want to press those edges. So now I can either pin it in place or just use little clips to hold it down. And since I'm not ready to sew, I think I'll just use these little clips. I could continue to press the remaining fabric here, but I like that freedom of being able to choose and move the fabric as needed. And now when I want to add additional fabric, when I'm done stitching, I can just sew more fabric and attach it to here as needed. I can even decide where I want my sewing to begin. I don't have to leave just a 2-inch margin. The more margin I leave, the more flexibility I have with attaching it to a piece at the end. If I don't leave enough room, I'll just attach additional fabric. It's just fabric, so it's very freeing. So now my piece is ready to start. If I wanted to, I could stamp some of the words, the months, if I was going to use that, go that route. I'd stamp them on some fabric, and I might do that ahead of time just so that I have that at the ready. I can also stitch some fabric on the background here just to add a little collage element. But for now, I'm not really sure how I'm going to start the first prompt, so I'm going to leave it. And now I'm ready to start the first prompt. And that will happen in just a few days. So that's the basis of my snippet roll for Stitch With Me in 2024. At the end of the year, I'll have a roll that I can either use on my Christmas tree as a garland, on my mantle, just on my table, or I can keep it rolled up and it's a little treasure that I'll have made of fabric and all of my little stitches throughout the year. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. And thanks for joining me today.